Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Human SOS Show. We're glad to have you today, and we are pleased to have V with us today. It's been a while, and so we're grateful that she can join us, and we're going to be talking about our internal messaging. So, Anton, you want to open things up for us?
Sure. I mean, honestly, probably should be V that's talking about this. She's the communication expert, whether it be
Yeah.
internal or external. But I'll start. We've been talking on a series, and we're going to continue talking about a series. It has to do with stress. Everything that we talk about at Perspective Force somehow, some way connects to stress. We talk about human SOS, which is human sustainability operational system, where we help companies kind of figure out how to manage their people in a way that doesn't burden them with too much stress, takes the stress off the table, and also, helps to fortify and create more resilience within their employees to create better engagement and retention. But today we're specifically focusing on internal messages and how self-talk, how to self-talk stress-free, right? We a lot of times don't pay attention to our self-talk. And there's a lot of research that talks about how much our own self-talk impacts us, both physically and chemically, right? You go and you look at those things where like people talk negatively to, I think it was like algae or something like that. Like I forget that. You guys know the experiment I'm talking about. Somebody talks negative to like an algae and it turns to a certain bad color or rots. I forget what it was. If you guys know the thing, tell me.
There's the water. They've done also that experiment with water, I think.
And what was it? You know more about it, V?
What I've seen is that if you use bad words, that the water gets like all kind of troubled. But if you speak nicely, then there are kinds of stars that form in the water. So I think the plants. I think I know what you're talking about, but I also cannot remember. But it's more or less the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was like what I remember. I think it was like a bacteria that they did, and they studied and did different things with it. So think about it, right? If some stuff like that gets impacted by it, think about how much your own brain gets impacted by it. Think about how much that affects your body and your, more importantly, your social behavior, right? A lot of times we don't think about how our own self-talk impacts how we interact with others, and also how we are with others and how others are with us. It's not just about that. I'm talked about 3 stories down the road here and how to recognize your self-talk, but those are all important factors. But before we get into the presentation of self-talk, we always start with AHR relevant article, right? The show is designed for leaders of all type, but really geared towards the human resource department because we're focused on humans, and we're really trying to bring the human first, or whatever the trendy word of the day is today. But let's get into the article, Kev. Skip this. Perfect. So this one is a little bit off base. I just kind of thought it was an important one to discuss. I've had a lot of experience with non-competes, and I was searching this morning through, SHR, SHRM, or whatever articles, and I was reading, and it said President issues order aiming to limit employee use of non-competes. And I've been on a side where it hurt me, where I couldn't find work in a nearby space because the non-compete was present. But I've also been on the employer side where it was designed to protect me. It wasn't followed, and it really hurt the business a lot. And I'll give you guys a story real quick. There was a location that I was working at, and a disgruntled team member before I got there left and opened up a location, a small studio within 3.5 miles of this place that we worked at. Ended up poaching about $80,000 of recurring revenue every single month. Took a lot of team members with them in the process, and it was kind of like all hush hush. Found out, it really hurt our business. There had to be a court, a lawsuit and a long proceeding, and really the company came after him, and I believe they won, if I remember. I left the company by that point. But I was on the end of, here I am trying to do everything I can for my people, right? Trying to be the best manager I can. But as a corporation, sometimes I can't offer the same things that a private studio may offer. Flexibility of schedule, a few other things like that, because I follow corporational rules. And it was really, I felt unfair. I felt like I was, somebody broke this rule that they agreed on not to do. All they had to do was 1.5 miles further. It wasn't a non-compete that prevented them from working in an industry. It wasn't a non-compete in the city. It was a 5-mile radius. That's all that was asked. And they decided not to do that. But at the same time, I also know stories of people that want to find a job, but to do that, they have to get out a 50-mile radius. Well, if your city is a small city, 50 miles, you're going, pretty far away to try to find a job, but you're getting in a boondocks and there's nothing out there. So you literally have to move in order to find work. So what are your guys' general thoughts on non-compete before we get into the details of the article?
Go on, Kevin, because I'm thinking about it.
Well, I don't know. Government intervention in general is not my favorite thing. And, the concept of non-competes, I get it, because someone hires a person and invests in them, and they give them information that the general public would not have. So I appreciate the need for non-compete to protect what has gone on, and all that. But like Anton commented, though, if we're going to have it, it needs to be followed and enforced. But before a person signs one, they need to really consider, do they want to make that kind of commitment to that company? Because a lot of times non-competes can go multiple years, some as few as a few months, but sometimes multiple years, and that really restricts that person in that industry. So.
Yeah. So for me, I was thinking at least in Europe, I had heard about the time constraints, but not the distance constraints. So that is new to me. I've never really been involved as an employer or as an employee with a non-competition agreement. But yeah, I'm with Kevin. You have to really think about what you want, and whether when you are put in that position that you want to leave and you have to follow a non-compete agreement, is it worth it? And can you live with the consequences? From an employer's point of view, I understand, because sometimes you're dealing with confidential information and you don't want your competition to know about them. But in my opinion, when you are professional and you're being hired, people hire you because you're not going to tell secrets to others. So yeah, it's to me, it's a strange concept. I understand why they're doing, because they want to, as I said, to cover the confidentiality they have. But again, as an employee, when you sign it, make sure you know that you are aware of the consequences and what that would mean for you if you are put into this position one day.
Great point,
And
guys. Go ahead.
Let me give a shout out. We've got KS Parashar. Welcome, KS. Glad to have you from India. And you were, I believe, inquiring where we're from. I'm from the state of Georgia in the U.S., and Anton's from Colorado, and V is from Luxembourg. So I guess if we ask others to identify where they're from, we need to own up to ours.
V, you still in Luxembourg?
I'm still in Luxembourg, yes.
When's your change happening?
Probably in a few months.
Few months,
Yes.
Okay. So the claim was that this executive order aims to promote competition in the American economy, which will lower prices for families, increase wages for workers, and promote innovation and even faster economic growth, according to a fact sheet released by the White House. So go ahead and hit the next slide. I got 2 slides on this, or 3, I can't remember. Just some high-level things.
One thing that comes to mind on this is that kind of interesting that if we have people working from integrity, it's only reasonable, like V said, if you're professional, you don't reveal
exactly
stuff you learn from one company to the next. And even the idea of competing, if, again, that's, if people have integrity, that becomes different. And unfortunately, I think having to have non-competes and all of that is evidence of a challenge in that area. So
it's an interesting point on integrity, Kev, because to some people that may not be considered violating integrity, right? I left the company, yeah. I got the skills. This is what I know now. I carry that with me. Why shouldn't I share with my new company how those things go and try to advance my career because of my knowledge that I acquired elsewhere. So it's a tough one for me to put on integrity because that's a little bit loose in interpretation. But what they're talking about is removing barriers to competition. The White House said barriers to competition drive down wages because employees can't leave, especially in a small location. They can't go to a neighboring place and find employment because, you know, of the non-compete. So what that ultimately does, according to the White House, is the employer can keep the wages down, the environment poor, because it locks those, especially lower wage employees in there. When there are only a few employers in town, like I said, I already read that basically. States typically regulate non-competes. This point is for me close because politics, and I won't get too deep into this, but I believe that our, you know, United States, and the point is states, it's not United US and that's it. The government, federal government is not the only government. There's states that have regulation on non-competes. California, North Dakota, and Oklahoma have banned non-compete agreements. They've made that legislative decision within the state, and that's what they did. Others have, nearly a dozen other states have prohibited such agreements with low wage earners. So they only allow more higher wage earners to have that and not low wage earners. And that's what I personally like. When I asked you guys your opinion, this is where I'm at. I think that each state should decide how they run this, and that's what makes our country great, is ability for states to make those decisions, because I can pick up and move to a neighboring state if I don't like that. But currently, if this continues to go on this way, especially if at some point get rid of non-competes, I, as a business owner, may want to pick up and move to Luxembourg or to another country altogether, because I just can't compete in this environment from a business standpoint, especially if my business has a lot of proprietary information in it.
Yeah, and I agree, Anton, that the idea that it's determined locally is always better. And then additionally, if I'm reading this correctly, this was an executive order approach to this. And executive orders make me nervous because it doesn't get the chance for our representation to have a say on it. And so I'm, again, local control is better. Welcome,
yeah, somewhere around 1776, there was a bunch of executive orders we didn't like. And we decided to, you know what, enough. And we built the country and our system to not have to do that. But it seems like we're lately coming back to it. But it's okay. I understand. Like I said, I see both sides to it. I do. Go ahead and hit the next one. I just think there's a middle ground that we can find instead of trying to go yes, no kind of thing. Let's find how to make it work, get more detailed, and really break it down.
Welcome to Isaac. Isaac's been here before. Glad to have you. Comments, image is blurry. I don't see it on our end, but let us know if it continues, Isaac.
So talks about protecting confidential information. Somewhere between 1/4 and nearly 1/2 of private sector workers are subject to some kind of non-compete agreement. The clauses were first introduced to prevent upper-level employees from taking trade secrets to rival businesses, but have since proliferated to low-wage and low-skilled workers. And this one's interesting to me because I think that's kind of necessary, because all workers tend to be exposed to a lot more information. I think companies are much more open now, which is what I want. And there's a lot more knowledge being shared with downline that may have not been in the past. And I ask from C-level suite anyway. I want transparency. I want full education and full delivery to those team members. So it's interesting how it's shifted. And then, should non-competes be limited, employers would have to consider new ways to protect their customer relationships, financial investments, business goodwill, and confidential information. Any thoughts on any of these guys?
No, I want to come back. Well, Kevin made a good point earlier on, and I think it's, and you as well, Anton, it's the balance between being hired for your skills and knowledge and having a non-compete agreement, because you are being hired because of the skills and knowledge you've acquired. So if you have a non-compete agreement, then for me, I must say I have a challenge dealing with that question, because some of the things that you learned are who you are, and that's why you've been hired for, you've been offered a job for another company, because of the knowledge you've acquired. So the non-compete agreement, again, I understand the trade secrets, etc. But there are some things, once you have the knowledge, you cannot kind of unknown what you've learned. And if you would be able to unlearn what you know, you probably wouldn't have been hired for this new company. So it's a tricky one, I think. I understand, and of course, yeah, trade secrets and things that are highly confidential, you shouldn't disclose. But as I said earlier on, and as Kevin repeated, if you are professional and you have integrity, that's, for me, that's a common sense. You would not disclose something to another company. But then maybe if people have done that, it's because it had happened in the past. So yeah, I still have to think about that one, Anton.
Well, a couple of things come to mind. Being a trainer, a teacher, at times working with private organizations, the question becomes, as I teach, and develop lessons and things like that, wondering about the idea of who has the property rights, intellectual property rights on that, kind of along the same lines. And so it's a struggle to consider. The other piece is, in terms of trade secrets, they should already be protected. That should be a non-issue because of patents and trademarks and that kind of thing. The only thing to me that might be exposed per se is clients and client list, but even that, especially now with the internet, if I want to find out, who a company or an organization is using for clients, if a little effort probably can find that out. And so, the risk, if it's done correctly, is not that great, I would say. Maybe I'm too simplistic in it, but
well, based on my experience, I'll share you guys a different view. And I'm with the clients, Kev, I'm a little torn, right? Especially from the service industry. One of the greatest connections to client retention is team member retention. When you lose a team member in a service industry, usually, especially if they stay in that service, the clients tend to go with them wherever they go, because that relationship is much more closer with the individual delivering the service than necessarily the company, which is a whole other story on how companies need to structure that. But I'm torn because I think that's okay, right? If I have a relationship with somebody that's delivering a great service, I'm not necessarily doing anything bad by going with that individual, nor is the individual maybe even asking me to do that. I, as a client, want to do that because I just want to stay with who I know. But on the other side, it's also protecting employers from employees being poached. That's something that people don't think about non-competes. Is like I said, in service industry, anything like that, all I have to go is find somebody with a big book of business, right? And I just have to offer them a little bit more money than their current employer is offering. I don't care about them. I care about the book of business that's going to come with that individual, and I'm going to get a whole lot more money than I'm paying that person for a little bit. Who knows? Maybe in a little bit, I'm going to dump that employee and just take the revenue from the client. So that's one that people don't often talk about with non-competes, is poaching.
Right.
Yeah. To me, it all comes back around to integrity and treating people decently. And part of me, with what we talk about culture and organizational ecosystem, if you can't retain your folks, then before you do things that cause you to lose them, consider you may lose business as a result. And that's another good motivation to have a healthy organizational ecosystem, because you want to keep those folks. And so there's a lot of, this one's got a lot of little tentacles, and
it's not an easy one. It definitely is not. And hit the next one. There's a defense there. A lawyer, an employment lawyer, is talking about. He talks about, first it dives into President supports PRO Act, which I'm just going to loosely mention. Weaken right to work laws in 28 states by permitting unions to require workers at unionized companies to pay dues, which currently they don't have to. Many of these states, you can be part of the union, but you don't have to. The PRO Act would force them to pay dues. And I'm like, wait a minute, how is this taking care of an employee? Greatly expand the definition of employee and almost expunge the concept of independent contractor. That one bothers me. I love being an independent contractor. I love being a gig worker, and that's not always a bad thing. Although I do know that there is a lot of companies that take advantage of it. They don't want to pay benefits. They don't want to have full-time employees, so they just create a bunch of contractors so it's easier to manage. But once again, it's not black and white. It's not just everybody wants this or everybody wants this. We have to find a way how to solve the solution of specifically companies doing that while still allowing independent contractors that want to be independent contractors to stay that way.
This union thing, wow, that to me is going just the opposite of what the theoretical intent is. You're restricting people's behaviors by forcing them to, or allowing them to be forced to pay dues in a right to work state. That seems counter to what the whole theory behind this is to open up competition and all. That one trouble.
Isn't that most of our legislature though? You see what's on the title, but then you start reading the fine print. It's like, oh, there it is. Like that's what you really are getting at. But yeah, hit the last one. I think there's one more. I can't remember how many of these I've made. But yeah, so defense to this all is just basically this lawyer was talking about, and she said many businesses have legitimate reasons for requiring workers to sign the agreement. And individualized assessments of the agreements that consider the industry and the geographical location should be conducted instead of an outright ban. Bam, right there. Consider the industry and the geographical location, right? If it's like this, right? If I'm a coffee shop, and I'm trying to create a non-compete, well, guess what? Nobody's going to worry about you 10 miles away. Those are not your customers, even 5 miles away, depending on how saturated that market is. Nope, I'm just using a very simple example. So for you to say 50 miles is ridiculous. That's unreasonable. But for you to say 3 miles, I may say, okay, that makes sense because people get used to seeing those people, whatever it may be. But that's kind of the defense there. Any thoughts on the defense, guys? We're already kind of beat it down. Let's move on. Let's get into the meat and potatoes.
Well, I have to ask, V, is this kind of thing something you deal with in Europe?
No, that's why for me, I was thinking it seems to be really something American or more American than European, because as I said, I've heard people who had non-compete, and it was mostly in the time that for 6 months or for a year, they were not allowed to go to the competitor. But in this type of details and limitation, I had never heard that before. Maybe it's there. I'm not saying it's not there, but I'm just not aware of that. And somehow the few examples I have in mind, people have managed to deal with that peacefully. So as I say, I'm really struggling with that one, maybe because it's an area I've never been personally involved with. Yeah.
Interesting. So, it'd be interesting to know if this is a primarily American thing. If we're dealing with issues that we shouldn't even be worrying about. Welcome.
One of the reasons why I love V here, because she always gives us that perspective. Like, we're so limited sometimes here, and we think, oh, that's just the way the world is. But it's not. The world's very different all over the world.
Or maybe it is, and I don't know. That's also possible. But as I say,
you're pretty experienced, V. I think you've had enough experience to kind of know what's going on around your spots. Let's get into the presentation, Kev.
Welcome, Bob Ford, one of our regulars. Glad to have you, Bob, from Texas, I believe, if I remember correctly.
I think so too. So, right, when we're trying to understand our internal messaging and our internal self-talk, how do we learn to listen to ourselves, guys? How do you two learn to listen to your internal monologue per se?
That's a great question, and like everything, I would say it takes practice. I think that the key is like everything, is first to start being aware of what we're doing, and being aware of when we are focusing on the negative thoughts rather than the positive thoughts. When we start noticing a pattern, that is where we can say, hey, stop. Is that really true? Is that really what happened? Is that really what has been said? So to ask ourselves questions. But as I said, the first thing is really to become aware of what we do. And we human beings, and probably also women even more, we have a tendency to focus on the negative stuff. And if someone says 9 good things and 1 bad thing, we're going to think about the bad thing over and over and over again. And that's why I say it takes practice first to notice that we're doing that, but also after to say, okay, stop. Is that really true? And what if, even if it's true, look at all the 9 other things that you've done. So yeah, with practice, we're all getting better, but I'm still falling into that trap once in a while, I admit it. But yeah, getting better with the age, I guess.
Well, what your comment, you have 9 good things and 1 bad thing. There's saying out there, you know, it takes, what is it, 5 attaboys to overcome 1 oh crap, or something like that. You know, one of the things I continue your question about how do we consider our internal messaging, and one of the things, Anton, I go back to what I challenge people starting first of this year: disconnect. Okay, I think we miss what we're saying to ourselves because we're just so busy being about what we do. So to really evaluate it, we got to unplug, disconnect on some level from whatever is distracting us, and then purposely observe what's going on internally, observe internally and externally, and really stop and think about it. How often do we have a routine, even driving to a location for work? People that commute, they drive this, and you know, here in Atlanta, that can be up as much as 2 hours. But if you ask them what went on during their commute, a lot of people go, wow, I don't know, because we're so tuned into what we're doing that we don't even observe what we're doing really. And then once we start looking at that observation, you know, making the observation, then put it in the right perspective. And to me, that best perspective is that big perspective, even outside of ourselves. And those are part of what I challenge people to use to even gain wisdom. And so I think more and more I'm convinced that needs to be a routine that we have built, or a part of our routine that we have built in.
Yeah.
I love how you mentioned the word disconnect, right? In the past, I would have said, me about 5 years ago, maybe about 8 years ago, when I first became a meditation coach and I wanted to teach people to meditate, I would say the word meditate. But that's not for everybody. That's what meditation does, is allows us to disconnect from our busy mind and busy things and really center on ourselves. But there's many ways to do that. And that's what kind of we focus at Prospective Force on, is we want to accomplish the thing of disconnection, but find a way for each individual employee in a custom tailored way to do that. Some may just go for a walk. Some may go take a camping trip over a weekend and spend time in nature. I might go fishing or something like that. Like, right, there's so many different things that we can do to disconnect from the busy world that we're constantly living. And you hit it spot on, Kev. That's a great point. I think Bob has a comment, Kev.
He does, yeah. His comment is, and Bob, I apologize, you show up as LinkedIn user. I don't know why StreamYard does that, but we know who you are and we love you. Says, I'm the only one I listen to most of the time, but my favorite question is, what if? Certainly a good way to really do some consideration of what we're talking about is to ask, what if? I like that. That's a good one.
Hit the next slide.
Okay.
Por favor.
I didn't know you spoke French.
What's that?
Or is that Spanish?
Por favor is Spanish, yes.
Spanish, yeah. So this is not anything but what I use in my personal coaching. I've done this for many times. I've figured out these are the 3 stories that are constantly running through our minds. You know, at any given point, in any situation, you're usually saying a story about yourself, right? That is completely you, about you. You're saying a story about others, you know, how you're perceiving them, and then a story that you think others are saying about you. And what I challenge people is to learn to capture these 3 stories, because it gives us a framework that's a little bit easier than just generally listening. And when we get good, we don't need them. We can really pay attention to other things. But in the meantime, start with capturing these 3 things. And then kind of like Bob asked, what if? Ask, are they accurate? How accurate are these stories, right? Put your lizard brain away, that fear survival based side of us that's very early human that tends to tell lies. It tells lies all the time. It captures one little thing, one little perspective, and then it blows it out of proportion in our own head, and none of it is reality. So slow down and assess how accurate are these stories, and use your logical part of your brain to do that.
Yeah. No, it's exactly, that's what I say, is asking ourselves, is that really true what I'm thinking? And like Bob said, as a what if I'm wrong, or what if there is another explanation, or what if whatever. But it's, I think it's really important to pause, to disconnect, as Kevin said, whether it's just a few minutes per day or a weekend or going on holiday for a week or two or whatever. But it's really, really important to really forget everything, all the negativity, especially in these times, and really challenge ourselves. Is that really true what I'm thinking?
Well, it's funny, Anton, you mentioned our lizard brain. I know that's a reference to primal thinking, but one of my sayings that I use these days is that quite often that the dragons we create in our minds, when we truly come to terms with them, they're just exaggerated lizards. So, I'm sitting here thinking, okay, lizard brain out of proportion becomes a dragon, and sometimes these dragons are the negative stories, the bad that we see of ourselves and tell ourselves. And so I didn't realize that maybe that saying has a little more factual basis.
Deeper than you thought, man. You are deeper than you thought. It's just reality, guys. You have to remember what we're designed to be as human beings is not positively wired. We're wired for survival. That's our natural wiring. We have to change that. An environment changes that, and then it can also be changed back. Go ahead and hit the next slide.
Well, Bob makes an observation. Have to agree with him. Our current media feeds a lot of our story, and it's not in a healthy, positive way.
Exactly.
Well, think about it, right? Like if I was a group of people that wanted to control, or at least somewhat control, the population, do I want them to be logical, or do I want to keep them in that lizard brain survival state? Exactly. Which one is easier to manipulate and control? The people that are not logical, that are afraid, that are very easy to scare, move left, right, command like sheep. We're closer to animals at that point. But people that are living in their logical side of their brain, very difficult to control. I think our media is designed that way. Not a conspiracy theorist, but I just don't understand why it's gotten to this level of extreme.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one, Anton, as well.
So, right, how do we go about changing it, right? How do we actually go from negatively wired to positively wired, or at least neutral, right? There's not necessarily negative to positive right away. We can do neutral. We'll talk about that on the next slide. But it talks about the concept of neuroplasticity. Our brain is constantly generating new neurons in certain brain regions, not all, certain brain regions. And what we have to do is we have to generate the kind of neurons that are going to encourage positive thinking, right? So what happens then, new synapses are, the space in between neurons, and new skills and experiences create new neural connections. When you have positive thoughts, those are like positive experiences. They create positive connection. Then what happens as we repeat that over time, which we're going to talk about here in a sec, you're going to see that those get reinforced. And as the positive one get reinforced, we use less and less of the pre-existing negative ones. And what ultimately happens, then those weakened synapses start to break down and become weak and sometimes completely disappear. So that's neuroplasticity, in a very simplified way. But guess what? It doesn't matter if you're 70 and you say, I've been this way all my life. You can still change it. You can still go and rewire your brain. Yes, of course, it's going to be a little bit difficult for somebody much older than it is for somebody much younger, but it's never too late.
Yeah, I think of a biblical principle. We're told to renew our mind. And interesting that we can't erase our thinking. If we did that, most of us would have to short circuit ourselves a lot. But the inputs, if they're positive, overcome the inputs that are negative. And that's why we have to renew our minds. And frankly, what are we allowing in to start with? What are we exposing ourselves to? And so a question in terms of our inner story is, what are we letting in to be a part of the mix?
Yeah. Yeah. No, and it's like I said at the beginning, it comes with practice. The more you practice being aware and having positive thoughts, the more positive thoughts you will get. And by being positive, I don't mean to see everything in pink and that everything suddenly will work out. But it's just like trying to have another perspective and say, yeah, in that case, what if, or what is the best that could happen in that situation, or what is the worst that can happen in the other situation, and put the two into perspective, so that often you see, like as we said, this lizard is not the big dragon, but actually it's a lizard, or maybe it's even smaller than a lizard.
Yeah.
So yeah, it all comes with practice for sure.
Yeah, you guys mentioned the word perspective. Sometimes it's simply shifting your perspective. The way you're looking at the lizard make it look like a dragon, but you take a full view, you back away, and you get further away from the problem, and all of a sudden it becomes a lizard. And it's a big metaphor, but that could be applied to so many different things, right? When we think problems are so big, but I think it's a common thing that people do, and they say, will this matter in 5 years? And when you start to pull away, you start to get away from that minute, that hour, that perspective that's really small, and really get broad, you go, no, it's not going to matter. I'm never going to think about this 5 years from now, but here I am losing sleep over it. Here I am driving my chemicals in the bad direction. Here I am creating poor interactions with people that are much more hurting relationships that will matter in 5 years over something that's just a lizard. Great point, guys. Let's hit the next one.
Sorry, Anton, just another point, because yesterday I was talking with Kevin about communication, and in that as well, it is important to also see which words we use, whether it's in our head or with other people, because it also helps us change our perspective. Instead of seeing things as a problem, for instance, we should see them as a challenge. What can I learn from that? And suddenly your whole perspective is like, oh yeah, I have this problem, but yeah, how can I make the best out of it? And then suddenly your perspective change, and it helps you again move forward.
Thank you for that reminder, V, because I actually need to hear that all the time. I use a lot of words that don't seem negative, but subconsciously they impact me negatively. And we talked about this with Kev last week, where 95% of our actions as human beings are subconsciously driven. And we don't see how we poison that subconscious with those words. And a mentor of mine, a long time ago, told me about, his name's Ryan, and he said he had a shift. He was on the road a lot, and he traveled a lot. One day he's sitting at the airport, and he's just feeling like, I don't want to go on this trip. I'm missing my son. I'm missing a game. And it's like, why do I have to do this? And he had an epiphany, and he said, you know what? What if I say I get to do this? And it's a common one that people talk about, and I think it's a powerful one, because then it makes you think, I have a job that allows me to put food on a table for my family where many people don't. I have a job that allows me to travel everywhere and see new places and give my son the future that he deserves. And it gives him the money to even play the sport in the first place, where many people can't afford that and don't have that opportunity. So from get to, or from have to get to, from, I think what's the other one that's common? I have to I think I want to, or something like that. There's a bunch of different play on words that we can do that really changes how we respond to it. And remember what we always talk about, the way that our body perceives the stress is half the battle on how that impacts our body and our mind. So simply changing that reduces 50% of the stress we potentially impose on ourselves.
Another quick one is, instead of saying I can't, is to say I cannot yet.
Yet. Love it. Power of yet. That's a big one too. Great one, B.
Well, and to me, one of the best ways, if I start going negative or feeling fearful, is shift and go old-fashioned count blessings. Like V said, look for the 9 great things that we have or is going on. And when we do that, it's hard to stay negative. It's hard to be angry. It's hard to be hopeless when we are grateful. And I think that's just a good basic practice. If we start feeling overloaded, go, wow, I've got this and this, and if we do that, it changes our perspective quickly. Let's see, Bob's got a comment here. Believe it or not, everyone has a special natural talent. Oh yeah, I believe that without a doubt. And to do their best in life, they need to focus and build on that. Using our strengths, something that we talk about on a regular basis. And one other comment, guys, part of what we do, part of the passion that we have is to, that people get stuck. And sometimes that's where you need a coach, somebody that can come in and help you sort through it. And it happens to any of us at any time. I know last week I was dealing with some struggles about this training that was coming up. And I was fortunate that one of my fellow soldiers took the time out, sat down, and chat about it a little bit. And I was able to get outside of my head a little on it and went ahead and was successful with it and, renewed. But sometimes you need a coach, a mentor, somebody that can help you get out of your own head and get out of being locked in your current situation.
Was that the jumping out of buildings training that you just did?
Yeah, the rappel training. And it was funny because the rappel part wasn't what bothered me. I'd done this before. It was other things that when I really got perspective and I even got to thinking about because some other physical challenges related to this training. It wasn't just rappelling, it was the other physical demands. And I thought, worst that can happen is I go and I get started and I can't finish, then I just say I gave it my best shot. And so just changing perspective makes a big difference.
Yeah,
absolutely. So the next one back, I think.
Yep, sorry about that.
and how we do this, right? Everything we just talked about, all the different things, different words we just named, it's just reframing. We're taking a thought, we're reframing into a different options. And there's different levels of it. Sometimes you may be ready to go fully positive, but sometimes you may be only able to get to neutral. But no matter what, it's still better than negative, right? So simple as negative, it will never happen. Realistic or neutral, it could happen. Or what if like Bob said, and then positive, it actually will happen. And it takes practice to get there. Is there any keys that you guys have to reframe your thoughts?
So for me, when I deal with a situation and it's bothering me, I keep asking myself, what is the best scenario? What is the best case that can happen? And then after, what is the worst case that can happen? And by doing that, I often realize that there is a much bigger chances that something will work out well rather than it will not work out. And then when I have these two things, I also think, okay, if I look at the positive side, okay, what if this happens? And then I try to see, okay, what are the next actions I could take? And in the worst, what can I learn from the worst case scenario? And what if it happens? So again, it's all about reframing and taking another perspective. But as I say, 9 out of 10 times, the positive wins, or most of the time. So.
Yeah, I'm the same way. What's the worst can happen? I know I get a little extreme, but at the end of the day, worst can happen is I can die. And I know that sounds but that doesn't necessarily bother me. I'm okay if that's what it takes, if it's important enough. But the other thing after years and years that I've realized is that first of all, the consequences that we fear and everything, more times than not, never even happen. I mean, it doesn't even kind of happen. It doesn't even show up at all. But yet those fears will stifle us. I mean, shut us down. And so learning, just take that from somebody that's been around a while. Most of the time, those things that we fear just never come to be. And the other one that's practical to me, and I know this, Anton, you may be able to explain a physiologic reason for this, but when I have a negative thought or a fear that I'm dealing with, saying it out loud affects my perspective. Hearing the words versus letting it just churn in my head. It makes a difference because that you say it out loud and you go, really? That's about as dumb as it gets.
And different parts of your brain to process information instead of being stuck in one, you opened it up, right? And I love how you guys both use that. And we mentioned it's not just all about being positive. It's not about rainbows and unicorns, is what I call those overly positive people that, almost to a point of being fake positive. Life is not always perfect. Life is not always amazing. There's risks. There's serious things that could happen. You could ask yourself, what's the worst that could happen? What's the best that could happen? And say, the worst thing that could happen is a lot worse than the best. I shouldn't do this. I shouldn't think about this, or whatever it may be. What I would add is, I'm a numbers person, over-index on logic way more than emotion, unfortunately, sometimes. So I even go deeper and I say, what is the likelihood of each, right? Here's the worst, here's the best, but if the best has 90% chance of happening, the worst has only a 5% chance of happening, those are not the same scales. So make sure we're not comparing them, equally.
A couple of things. Welcome, Todd. Glad to have you here today. And then Bob makes a comment. I guess he's trying to help me feel better about my struggle. Says he's going through sensitivity training and he's needing help adjusting to new social norms and communication practices. Yeah, and I appreciate the fact that you're making the effort to back up and reconsider. That's part of that reprogramming, that growth process. So that's great. And then Todd talks about fear. Fear of the unknown is a self-imposed illusion. Yeah, most times that fear, like we said, is we build it up to these dragons and monsters when in reality they're lizards and bugs. And we just got to keep that in perspective.
Well, and the next slide, if I remember correctly, what I put down there, we kind of get into why that happens, but it's not just from a thought standpoint. It's from a chemical standpoint. We talk about, I've discussed this in the past. If you guys really want to nerd out on some things and understand how our stress impacts our social behavior, look up polyvagal nerve theory. It's basically a nerve in the back of our head that allows us to switch from parasympathetic relaxed system, nervous system, to sympathetic kind of go and engage system. And we burn it out. We overuse that and we stay in that engaged sympathetic nervous system too long. Instead of going back down and recovering and coming back up there, we stay there chronically. And what ends up happening is we get into this freeze mode. We get into this shutdown mode where we feel hopeless, everything becomes bad, everything becomes negative. But the reality could be that the environment never changed. The environment is the same environment you've always been, and the people are the same way they've always been. The only thing that changed is finally stress caught up to you, as we like to call the analogy, the bucket is overflowing. And now all of a sudden you see things from a completely different lens. So I know you guys will not necessarily get deep into this because I'm the nerd here. But, what do you guys do to make sure that just, when you disconnect, is there anything besides like just disconnecting? V, do you have any advice on stress management when people feel like they're just negative perception? What would you do to help those chemicals inside your body?
So you brought something that made me think of something I do regularly, and I'm taking that for granted, but I know it's not for everybody. It's just the food. Watch the food you're ingesting, because it has a lot of influence on the clarity we have in our head and on our thoughts. And some foods, and Anton can tell you much more than me on that subject. But like if you eat too much sugar, yes, of course, you're going to be happy for a few seconds, maybe a few minutes or hours. But then after, you may come down into a depressed state, and you don't want that. You want to feel energetic, and you want to feel you have the good nutrition, full of vitamins and minerals, etc. So watch out the food you eat, what you drink as well. all the things that as well we do on a regular basis. I am one person as well who often look at labels and what is included in a product, like toothpaste. If they have fluoride as well is not good for our health and prevents our brain from functioning properly. So all of that has an impact on what we think and how we feel. So that would be also another thing I do apart from disconnecting.
And it's a huge one, V. That I intentionally asked that because I kind of felt you were going to go there, because she practices what she preaches. I mean, I know V's always on top of it. And guys, here's the thing. Like in a very basic standpoint, most people know cortisol. They heard the word cortisol. It's a stress response chemical. But what also they don't understand, there's many functions that it has. It doesn't just regulate stress. For example, it helps with regulation of blood sugar. So if your body's constantly pumping blood sugar spikes all the time, it's having to use cortisol to regulate it. So it's the same thing to the body as if your boss was yelling in your ear. But we don't think like that in business. We don't create this connection. It's gonna come, guys. I'm hoping in the next 5 years. I've been saying that 5 years ago, but maybe the next 5 years, the business is finally gonna connect the idea of how people are impacts on the inside, impacts their business performance significantly, not a little bit, significantly.
Well, one of the, balance. Okay, we talk about balance, and what we have to remember: we got a body, we got a soul, we got a spirit. Okay, so when we approach disconnecting and trying to reconnect, right, we have to think all three. One that comes to mind, certain circumstances, is that for me, sometimes I have to consider how I'm eating. The other is get into rest, thinking physical, get into rest and get into movement. Sometimes the best therapy I can do is go out and sweat and just challenge myself physically. And for the record, it's rarely going out and running or doing that kind of thing. It's going out and doing physical work of some kind, work in the yard, build a project, go for a walk. But when we do those things, and then, again, having a spiritual routine of some kind, when we're doing those things in balance, it helps us to deal with these different aspects, and we have to maintain that balance for a reason.
You just hit it really well, Kev, balance, because thoughts create chemicals, but chemicals create thoughts. You have to always approach them from both standpoints. If you're not taking care of yourself spiritually and your emotions all over the place, well, guess what? That same cortisol will spike simply because of the way that you think, and you're constantly fixated on maybe it's relationships, right? If you guys take a look at our assessment, and hopefully now, if you've watched our episodes for a while, you're starting to see why health, life, and work and leadership are all three components of stress management, because they are impacting body, soul, and spirit, right? All of them are going to be in that way. Hit the last one. I think there's one more, Kev.
Just a couple of things. Todd makes some good comments. He talks about future bringing anxiety and not living in the past. We got to be present. That's a key. And that in some regards, we create our own reality, whether it's real or not, it's real to us. And then food, he reinforced that. And a good phrase he says that he uses as a mantra is everything is exactly where it should be. Sometimes we keep looking for this magic, something that we don't have. Just say, hey, I'm where I need to be right now. Will I need to be there tomorrow? I don't know. But at least for now.
Stoicism is so good. That if you want to fortify your mind, become more stoic, folks, and you'll see how much easier life becomes when you can make statements like that. That's really powerful, Todd. Thanks for sharing, man. But guys, mastering self-talk is not an on and off switch, right? You're not just like I have this muscle up here. Like, what does that have to do with anything? You can build that beautiful muscle. You can develop it. But the minute you stop nurturing it, the minute you stop working on it and challenging it, it's going to weaken. It's going to shrink. I used to be 217 pounds at my biggest of solid muscle. Now I barely break 180. It's not because I'm more or less fat. It's because all that muscle has gone away because I don't train that way anymore. I don't push myself to those limits. So don't feel like I got there and we're good. Constantly work on it, constantly develop it. But guys, I want to finish up with the specific questions because we focus a lot on individuals. How do you two help leaders to help individuals have better self-talk?
I would say just force the issue. Okay, walk through the processes of what we've talked about. What are the good things that are going on in your life? What does it look like? Tell me, speak out what you're afraid of. What you're struggling with. So I think it's about just getting them in that moment to start the process, and then figure out which one of those activities or actions or approaches works for them. Hopefully, like we like what Todd's mantra is, everything's exactly where it should be. Well, hopefully, as we talk with somebody, we hit on something and they go, yeah, that resonates. So I'm going to take that and run with it. And for the moment, that may be all they do.
Yeah, for me, it's more or less the same. I like to ask questions that people don't dare asking themselves. And I first listen and then I say, yeah, but challenging them, say, but is that really so? Or what would happen if you would do this or that, or if you would think of that? And really challenge the person to try to take another perspective. And often people are like, oh yeah, I didn't think of that. Or if I tell them, what's preventing you from doing this or that, or thinking this or that? And then suddenly you see them hitting oh yeah, you're right. So really, I like to challenge people. I like to help them think a different way, take another perspective, and then, like Kevin, see what are the actions they can take, what are the things they can do little by little. We don't want to have a huge trying to achieve a big step, because usually people will give up. By implementing small steps, then they can slowly but surely start to practice and start to improve their way of thinking.
I love it. Questions, guys. Powerful questions. And leaders must learn how to ask powerful questions, because if you just tell a person how to think, they're not ever going to think that way. They may pretend like they will. They may, take it on for a little bit, but they will revert back because they need to arrive to that conclusion themselves. And my thing, to summarize everything you guys are saying, through questions, we're pulling them away into a much broader perspective, whether it be a longer time, whether it be a bigger picture, whether it be other people involved, whatever it is, we're helping them take on other perspectives and not necessarily take them on, but at least consider them. And when that consideration starts to occur, what are they doing? Are they living in that fear lizard brain, or now they're moving into the human, powerful, logical brain? That's what we're doing through questions. We're shutting down this really loud thing that lives at the very base of our brain that interferes with everything that happens above it. And through those powerful questions, you say, calm down, lizard, let the humans start to come into the picture.
Maybe sorry, go on, Kevin.
I was just going to say, Bob makes a comment, and this is another practical thing, is praising accomplishments, motivate them to provide input, encourage them to advance their participation because of skill. Encouragement alone goes a long way, because the great majority of folks out there in the world are already walking around feeling like they are losers. All of us do that. And so when we can encourage someone to think, you're not a loser, you may have had a failure, but you're not a loser type thing. So
exactly. Yeah, and on that topic, what I wanted to say, something that we may not always think about straight away, but it's also looking at who are we surrounded by, and look at people, because often what I notice, if you have negative people around you who see a problem for everything that is happening, you will also start to go into that same spiral and also have negative thoughts. And if you start surrounding yourself by people who are more positive or who are challenging you, then you will also learn, you will come out of that, and you will also start to learn to be positive, to be more positive, and to master your thoughts. So look also at your environment. It's better to have a few people that are there to support you, to encourage you, and to help you think positive, rather have thousands of people around you, but they're all negative, because this is just going to bring you down further.
Such a great point. Go ahead.
The saying to go with that one: it's hard to soar like eagles when you hang out with buzzards.
Yeah, there you go. That's the truth. I mean, it's tough to be a powerful human when you're with a bunch of caged animals, right? Like we take on that. You know, I call it the burning. I don't call it. I was taught that it's called the burning log principle, right? You take a burning log and you put it in the middle of ash, it's going to stop burning. You take a log, even if it's a wet log, with time in the burning logs, it's going to start burning. And it's hard to walk away from some bad relationships until you've shifted that mindset and you look back and you say, how did I stay there for so long? How did I survive that for so long? And sometimes people start to shift and they naturally get away from that because they go, I don't fit this. This just makes me feel uneasy when people just only see the bad of the world. They're very pragmatic. They're negative. Like that's all they can do. So guys, finishing this up, Human SOS, bring us to your team. Let us help your team to feel better from stress standpoint. Let us help your team perform better, but do it in a custom tailored way. Go take the assessment, www.perspectiveforce.com. There's a quick 12-question questionnaire that's a pre-assessment. If you do poorly in that, it'll give you a link to take a full 60-question assessment that'll assess all 12 different areas that stress impacts us in and from, and see which one is the worst. Where do I really need to start fixing this, whether it be by yourself, whether it be with a team. And always we can come in and do these presentations for you guys.
Yeah. There's you risk exposing your email, and that's it. And I promise you, we are not going to spam you or sell your email. Just take it and see what you think. Worst can happen is you spent a minute or two. Speaking of looking at the worst, worst can happen. You spend a minute or two and you go, well, that was a waste of my time. But I think what you will find, if you will give the opportunity, you will find it at least insightful, if not informational, and then lead to some additional consideration and thought for you. So please go use that. I promise you, you're not going to get a bill in the mail.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's it. Well, that's all we got.
Yeah.
V, thanks for being here today. You're always appreciated. Your perspective is always beneficial, especially to Anton and I.
Thank you guys for having me again.
Everybody, we will be back next Tuesday at 11, like we are each week. Anton, what are we kicking around next week?
Oh, goodness. Let me see. I'm trying to remember.
You weren't ready for the pop quiz.
Because we're moving into, let's see, we started with identity. I think we start talking about relationships, but specific aspect of relationship. I'll have to look it up. It's not, I don't have it in the back of my head right now.
Just for those of you to understand, what we're going through is the areas that we assess to help you get insight to. So
EQ. Next week is EQ.
Okay. And Todd, Bob, thanks for being here and commenting. That makes a lot of difference for us because it's better to hear from everyone, get different perspectives. So thank you.
I'd love questions. I'd love questions from the audience in the future. We'd love to answer stuff that you have specific and, and share things versus kind of general broad stroke conversation.
Yeah.
Very good. Everybody have a great rest of your week. See you later. Take care. God bless.